Iris knelt down beside the boy, gently placing her hand over his chest. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just listened. Then slowly she let out a breath, long and steady, like the weight she'd been carrying had finally shifted, easing off her shoulders. Coulter stayed back, bent over with his hands braced on his knees, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The others, neighbors, townsfolk, strangers, who had joined the search, stood a few paces away, still and silent. But their eyes weren't on the boy. They were fixed on her. She hadn't asked any questions, hadn't needed direction. She simply knew, and somehow she had found what all of them couldn't. And later, when the story passed quietly through the saloons and feed stores, when it reached the church steps and filled supper tables, no one dared call her cursed. No one whispered strange behind her back anymore, and instead they said something else. She hears with her heart, they told each other, and for once no one argued. The snow that winter lingered longer than usual. It clung to the edges of rooftops and curled around fence posts like it didn't want to let go. The land took its time waking up. By the middle of March, the creek had finally thawed, cutting ribbons through the pale pasture. The brittle gray grass began to soften to a hint of green, tentative and new. A warm breeze crept through the cracks of the old cabin, stirring the curtains like a slow exhale. Birds returned in quiet pairs, fluttering to the eaves and fence posts, always gentle, as if they understood not to disturb whatever was already healing there. Each morning Iris would step outside and write a message on the slate nailed to the cabin wall beside the front door. Just a few words, never more than a line. The day will be kind, I feel it. No one ever asked how she knew. They just read her words and believed. People came now, but they came softly. A young boy with a bruised wrist would show up, head bowed. A widow with a cough that clung too long would find her way to the gate. They didn't bring money. They didn't ask questions. They just brought trust. And Iris would meet them with quiet eyes. Sometimes she listened with her hands, tracing the story beneath someone's skin. Other times she listened with her gaze, steady and unblinking, as if she could see the ache behind their silence. She never asked for thanks, not once. But they left her gifts anyway. Jars of thick honey, scarves stitched with care, baskets of warm bread. Sometimes they left nothing but a bowed head and a silence that meant respect. Coulter saw it all, every small gesture, every quiet offering, but more than that, he saw her. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in soft shades of lilac, Coulter found himself sitting beside Iris on the worn wooden bench beneath the oak tree behind their house. It was the very same tree he had planted with his own hands years ago, the one that had witnessed countless quiet evenings, the slow endings of long days filled with hard work and quiet hope. He handed her a cup of tea, still warm, steam curling upward in delicate spirals. Then he set his own cup down beside his boots and turned his full attention to her. "I was wrong," he said simply. Iris looked at him calmly, a patient calm that held no confusion, no surprise. She waited for him to speak again. "That day in town," he began, shaking his head slowly, "when I told everyone you were the best deal I ever made." He paused, searching for the right words. "You weren't a deal at all. You were a gift, and I just didn't see it at first." A gentle breeze caught at her braid, lifting stray strands that framed her face. She didn't smile, but she spoke softly, her voice a whisper that sounded like dust stirring from a surface untouched for years. "I never needed sound," she said, "just you." Coulter blinked. He had never heard her voice before, not a single time, but somehow every day he had known her. And now, with just 6 words, she filled the space between them completely. He reached out and took her hand in his. "I've been listening," he said quietly, "even before I knew how." Slowly she leaned in and pressed a kiss to his lips, not as if it were something new, but something that had been quietly waiting all along. The kiss held no fanfare, no showy passion. It was simple, honest, the truth of everything they had already shared in silence. She rested her forehead against his, their breaths settling into the same slow rhythm. For a long moment, neither of them moved. There was nowhere else they needed to be. Time passed gently without ceremony. There were no clocks on the ranch, no calendars marking anniversaries, yet the world around them changed all the same. The chickens began nesting closer to the porch with each passing spring. The great oak tree sagged a little lower, its branches heavy with age and memory. Coulter's steps grew slower, and the edges of Iris's braid turned silver, like frost settling softly on the strands. Neither counted the years. They measured time differently, by the way tea cooled in the morning light, by the steady rhythm of the horses breathing at dawn, and by how their hands always found each other without needing to look. Most mornings children came to the ranch now, some from Westbridge, others from places farther away. They didn't come because someone told them to. They came because something quiet inside them longed to listen. Iris never taught with words. She showed them instead. How to hold still long enough for a rabbit to stay nearby. How to calm a restless horse with just an open palm. How to read the shifting wind across the fence line and know that something was coming long before it arrived. They learned to listen with more than their ears. And when one of them finally understood, not just copied, but truly understood, she would smile. That small, private smile, like light breaking gently across a frost-covered field. The bench beneath the oak still stood. It was there, under the sprawling branches, that Coulter and Iris spent most evenings, sitting side by side, sharing warmth and breath and a quiet comfort that needed no explanation. Sometimes Coulter would pull out an old harmonica and play a tune without a name, a string of notes that curved like the hills rolling away into dusk. Iris would close her eyes and lean into his side, swaying gently, not because she heard the music, but because she felt it. Sometimes she'd take his hand and press it to her chest, right over her heart. One morning, as the sky softened into gold, Iris wrote another message on the slate by the door. The day will be kind, I feel it. No one asked how she knew. They just believed. In town, people no longer whispered behind her back. Instead, they said, "She listens with her heart." Some still doubted. That's just how things are. But most brought gifts quietly without fuss, warm bread, dried apples, a clean handkerchief. And each left with something they couldn't quite name, a softness that settled deeper in their chest. That winter, a fierce snowstorm swept through the valley, blanketing the land in a thick, unyielding silence. When a boy went missing during that storm, panic gripped Westbridge tightly, but this time, no one rushed to call the sheriff. Instead, they came quietly to the ranch, because by now, they knew where to turn. Iris stepped outside without hesitation. She knelt down, pressing her palms firmly into the frozen ground, feeling its cold pulse beneath her skin. Then, without a word, she rose and pointed toward the west. Coulter followed her lead. So did everyone else. They moved through the frozen brush in a slow, steady line, crunching over snow-packed earth. 3 miles later, beneath the heavy trunk of a fallen oak, they found the boy, cold, frightened, but alive. He huddled under the massive tree, shielded from the harsh wind, his eyes wide with relief at seeing the group approach. No one questioned Iris after that day. Not once. Her quiet certainty, her ability to reach beyond what could be seen or heard, it was no longer a mystery to them. It was a gift, something rare and beautiful. The seasons continued their steady march. In the last light of a golden autumn, Coulter and Iris walked side by side through the pasture. A mare and her foal grazed nearby, heads dipping into the tall grass that whispered secrets with each passing breeze. The wind moved softly as if it remembered every moment that had ever unfolded on that land, the laughter, the hardship, the quiet moments that bound them all. At the top of the hill, they stopped. Iris turned to Coulter and laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it shook her shoulders and brightened her face like the dawn's first light touching the side of a weathered cabin. Coulter smiled and kissed her lips, just once, not for the first time, but with the quiet joy of a man who still couldn't believe his luck. No one ever told them how to live with such simple happiness. There were no instructions, no rules, only the gentle knowing that whatever had come before, whatever would come after, they had this, together. Mornings began with a gentle ritual. Iris wrote a few words on the slate nailed by the front door. Never more than a line, but always full of hope. The day will be kind, I feel it. No one asked how she knew. They simply trusted her. People started arriving quietly at the ranch, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. A boy with a bruised wrist, a widow with a cold that refused to lift. They came without questions, without coins, only trust. Iris listened, sometimes with her hands, sometimes with her eyes. When she helped, she never asked for thanks. But they gave it anyway. Jars of honey, hand-stitched scarves, silence that spoke volumes. Coulter saw it all. More than that, he saw her. One evening, under a sky painted soft lilac over the hills, Coulter sat with Iris on the bench beneath the oak tree behind the house. It was the very tree he'd built by hand, the same place where they'd shared countless quiet endings to long days. He handed her a cup of tea, still warm, set his own beside his boots, then turned to her. "I was wrong," he said quietly. She looked at him, not confused, just patient. "That day in town," he continued, "when I told them you were the best deal I ever made." He shook his head. "You weren't a deal. You were a gift. I just didn't see it right away." A breeze caught her braid. She didn't smile, but spoke softly, unsteadily, like dust lifting off a surface, untouched for years. "I never needed sound," she said. "Just you." Coulter blinked. He hadn't heard her voice before, not once, but he'd known her every day. And now, with 6 simple words, she filled the space between them. He reached for her hand. "I've been listening," he said, "even before I knew how." She leaned in and kissed him, not like someone new, but like something that had been waiting. A kiss that carried no performance, no noise, just the truth of what had already been shared in silence. She rested her forehead against his. Their breath slowed, falling into the same steady rhythm. For a long moment, neither moved. There was nowhere else they needed to be. Time passed without ceremony. No clocks were kept on the ranch, no anniversaries marked. But things changed all the same. The chickens nested closer to the porch. The oaks sagged a little lower with each spring. Coulter's steps slowed. Iris's braid turned silver at the edges. Neither counted years. They measured time in the way tea cooled, in the rhythm of horses breathing at dawn, in the way their hands found each other without looking. Children came most mornings now, some from Westbridge, others from farther away. They came not because they were told to, but because something quiet inside them wanted to listen. Iris never taught with words. She showed them how to wait still enough for a rabbit to stay, how to calm a horse with a single open palm, how to read the shifting wind across a fence line and know something was coming long before it arrived. They listened with more than ears. When one finally understood, not just copied, but truly understood, she smiled. That small private smile, like light breaking gently across frost. The bench beneath the oak still stood. That's where Coulter and Iris sat most evenings, shoulder to shoulder, sharing warmth, breath, and nothing they needed to explain. Sometimes Coulter would pull out his old harmonica and play something without a name, a string of notes curving like the hills. She would close her eyes, lean into his side, and sway, not because she heard the music, but because she felt it. Sometimes she took his hand and pressed it to her chest, right over her heart. One morning, as the sky paled into gold, she wrote her message on the slate by the door. "The day will be kind, I feel it." No one asked how she knew. They just believed her. In town, people no longer whispered. They said, "She listens with her heart." Some still doubted. That's the nature of things. But most brought gifts without fanfare. Warm bread, dried apples, a clean handkerchief. And left with something they couldn't quite name resting softer in their chest. That winter the wind blew harder than anyone could remember, and the snow swallowed the town whole. Another boy went missing during a fierce snowstorm. This time they didn't call for the sheriff. They came straight to the ranch. Iris stepped outside. Without hesitation, she knelt, pressing her palms firmly against the frozen ground, closed her eyes for a moment, then rose and pointed west. Coulter followed her lead. So did the others. They moved carefully through the frozen brush, the cold biting at their faces, their breath white in the air. 3 miles later, beneath the heavy trunk of a fallen oak, they found the boy, cold, scared, but alive and sheltered. No one questioned Iris after that, not once. In the last light of a golden autumn, Coulter and Iris walked together through the pasture. A mare and her foal grazed nearby, the wind moving gently through the grass as if it remembered everything that had ever happened there. At the top of the hill they stopped. Iris turned to Coulter and laughed. It wasn't loud, but it shook her shoulders and lit her face the way dawn touches the side of a cabin wall. Coulter smiled and kissed her lips, just once, not for the first time, but with the quiet joy of someone who still couldn't believe his luck. No one ever told them what to do or how to live. They simply did. Their days passed, marked not by calendars, but by small moments. A shared meal, the soft clucking of chickens nesting near the porch, the slow changing of the seasons. Iris kept writing her quiet messages on the slate, and people came to listen. They listened not with ears alone, but with their hearts. And in that small, unspoken way, a healing spread through Westbridge. The children who came stayed a little longer, learning not from words, but from the stillness, the gentle guidance of a woman who heard more than sound. The bench beneath the oak tree remained, worn smooth by years of quiet companionship. And on that bench, day after day, Coulter and Iris sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing warmth, breath, and a love that needed no words.